Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a true crime mystery so wild, so deeply embedded in the glittering court of King Louis XIV that it literally birthed the modern Parisian police force. We're talking about a 17th century web of murder, dark magic, and a massive cover-up reaching the absolute highest levels of power.
Okay, let's dive right into this. Picture this. It's 1676. A French noblewoman, Madame de Brinvilliers, is standing in front of a massive crowd in Paris, literally moments away from her execution. And instead of begging for mercy, she shouts to the crowd that half the town is guilty of the exact same crime she's dying for. Talk about a bombshell, right? That single sentence plunged the entire city into absolute paranoia. People were terrified. Was she bluffing? Or was the aristocratic elite of France secretly poisoning each other?
Section 1. A noblewoman's deadly secret. The Brinvilliers murders.
So, this whole panic kicks off with one major inciting incident. We have a wealthy aristocrat using cutting-edge chemistry to slaughter her own family. See, Madame de Brinvilliers wanted her family's vast wealth, and her lover, an officer named Godin de Sainte-Croix, knew exactly how to get it. When her father temporarily tossed Sainte-Croix into the Bastille prison, the guy didn't just sit there twiddling his thumbs. He basically got a masterclass in toxins from an Italian poison expert who happened to share his cell. Once he got out, armed with this deadly knowledge, he taught his lover everything. In 1666, she poisoned her father. By 1670, she'd poisoned her two brothers. But you know, there's no such thing as the perfect crime. It all unraveled in 1672 when Sainte-Croix died suddenly, leaving behind a lockbox just stuffed with highly incriminating letters and lethal chemicals. She went on the run, but was eventually captured and executed in 1676.
Now, the weapon of choice here became infamously known as inheritance powders. These were deadly, totally undetectable, arsenic-based concoctions. They were odorless, they were tasteless, and they basically just mimicked the symptoms of natural illness. You can probably see how perfectly and terrifyingly this fit into the greedy, high-stakes world of the French aristocratic. I mean, if you were tired of waiting around for a wealthy relative to pass away, a few strategic sprinkles of this powder could tragically, but very discreetly, speed up the whole process.
But here is perhaps the absolute most horrifying detail of this whole story. Before using these inheritance powders on her own flesh and blood, Madame de Brinvilliers needed to perfect the dosage, right? So she actually used the guise of doing charity work to visit the sick at a hospital in Paris, secretly testing her experimental toxins on unsuspecting, vulnerable patients. Just let that sink in for a second. It was a terrifying wake-up call for the public, an aristocratic woman using charity as a cover for murder.
Section 2. The First Police Chief. Enter Nicolas de la Reynie.
Well, the sheer panic following her execution meant King Louis XIV had to do something. He realized his glittering capital was completely spiraling out of control, so he created a groundbreaking new role, the Lieutenant General of Police. This wasn't your traditional lawman. This role was tailor-made for Nicolas de la Reynie in 1667. Think of him as a hybrid between a modern police chief and the mayor of Paris. To get the job done, he assembled a massive network of spies, a bureaucracy of commissioners, and officers on horseback.
La Reynie had two vastly different but equally massive tasks on his plate. On the one hand, he was literally out there paving roads, implementing mud taxes, and installing the very first streetlights to clean up the physical filth from the Parisian streets. But on the other hand, he was tasked with cleaning up the moral filth from the aristocracy. And what he quickly figured out was that the gritty, impoverished underworld of Paris was actually deeply, deeply connected to the opulent halls of the royal court.
Section 3. Paris's poisonous underworld. The web of la Voisin.
La Reynie's investigation pulled him straight into the Montorgueil quarter. This was a neighborhood where desperate poverty sat literally just a stone's throw away from the king's palace. And the sheer scale of what he uncovered there, well, it's perfectly encapsulated by this staggering number, 400. Through his initial arrests, La Reynie's forces squeezed confessions out of suspects who claimed there were an estimated 400 suspected poison dealers operating in Paris alone. Business wasn't just existing down there, it was booming.
Now, what's really interesting about this is the actual inventory of these underground markets. It was completely bizarre and incredibly grisly. You had fortune tellers who basically doubled as amateur chemists and abortion providers, peddling things like toad bones for love powders, Spanish fly as an aphrodisiac, human blood for dark magic rituals, and, obviously, arsenic for murder. And the undisputed queen of this grim underground industry was a woman named Catherine Montvoisin, better known simply as Lavoisin.
Lavoisin ran her network like a totally ruthless CEO. She actually once noted, "What a boon it is to our profession when lovers resort to desperate measures." She essentially monetized human desperation, whether it was an unrequited crush or someone just wanting to eliminate a wealthy husband. But here's the kicker. Lavoisin's client list wasn't just everyday Parisians. Oh no, it was absolutely packed with the highest-ranking members of the royal court.
Section 4. The Royal Mistress Implicated. The Threat in the King's Bed.
So our detective La Rainey is systematically dismantling Lavoisin's network, right? When suddenly, the trail of evidence points directly to the center of the Sun King's world. Just imagine La Rainey's absolute terror in this moment. What happens when your prime suspect is effectively the real Queen of France? The investigation ended up implicating Madame de Montespan, King Louis XIV's beloved and incredibly powerful official mistress. She was considered practically untouchable, yet here were Lavoisin's associates swearing that Montespan was one of their most frequent and most desperate clients.
Let's move on and see how this builds, because the allegations outlined a truly terrifying escalation. According to the testimonies, Step 1 involved Montespan buying simple love potions to secure the king's affection early on in their affair. But as his eyes began to wander over the years, she allegedly escalated to Step 2. We're talking hiring renegade priests to perform blasphemous black masses, sometimes even acting as a human altar herself, to spiritually bind the king to her. And finally, Step 3. When she feared she was truly being replaced, she allegedly plotted to poison the king's very clothes, along with her new, younger rival.
Honestly, her reign was just one of pure, unrestrained chaos. I mean, she had earned the unofficial title of Queen of Versailles and was the mother to 7 of the king's legitimized children. Now, while those dark occult allegations of human altars were horrific, the historical record also highlights her incredible flair for petty vengeance. Like the time she allegedly released 2 literal pet bears into a rival's apartment just to wreck the place? Seriously, no way to make that up. The court was a circus, for sure, but these new allegations of treasonous poisonings, those were deadly serious.
Section 5. The King's Cover-Up. Burning the Evidence.
So how exactly does a monarch handle the revelation that the woman sharing his bed might be a murderous client of the Parisian occult? Well, simple. The pursuit of justice suddenly hits a massive brick wall. King Louis XIV abruptly halted the investigation. La Rainey had done his job perfectly. He followed the evidence, unraveled this massive conspiracy, and he found the truth. But that truth was entirely too dangerous for the monarchy. If he tried the mother of his children for dark magic and regicide, it would absolutely destroy the legitimacy of the crown itself.
Now, before the king completely shut everything down in 1682, the sheer scale of the fallout was immense. The special tribunal, known as the Chambre Ardente, or the Burning Chamber, was devastatingly thorough when it came to the lower classes. 218 people were imprisoned, 34 were brutally executed, including Lavoisin herself, and another 190 were arrested but not charged. Yet the absolute most powerful suspect of them all? Madame de Montespan. She was quietly shielded from facing any formal charges. To quiet the ensuing public panic, the king executed a brilliant, if deeply cynical, political maneuver, the 1682 Edict. This strictly regulated the sale of dangerous chemicals like arsenic, but more importantly, it legally reclassified witchcraft. He declared that magic wasn't actually real, it was mere fraud and superstition. By legally transforming these terrifying witches into simple con artists, the king essentially told all of France to calm down, go home, and stop looking for supernatural conspiracies.
But the cover-up didn't even end there. Years later, to guarantee that the darkest secrets of his court would never see the light of day, the king took personal action. Listen to this incredibly visceral description of the event. Page by page, Pontchartrain handed documents to the king, who fed each of them into the hungry flames. Louis XIV literally stood at a fireplace in Versailles and burned La Rainey's most incriminating investigative files with his own hands.
And that brings us to the ultimate irony of our explainer today. The Sun King created the modern police to uncover the truth and protect his reign, only to realize that true power sometimes means choosing exactly what history forgets. La Rainey's police force was incredibly effective, but it learned a very hard lesson. The law applies very differently to those who make it.
The affair of the poisons happened centuries ago, but the dynamics of power, privilege, and institutional cover-ups, those are completely timeless. It leaves us with a pretty provocative question.
What modern secrets are currently being burned in the fireplaces of the powerful? It really makes you wonder what truths our own investigative systems are uncovering today, only to have them quietly locked away or destroyed. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep questioning what you learn, and I'll see you next time.